She handed me a cardboard box of my father's belongings and told me I had 48 hours to get out of his house. I looked at her, smiled, and said, "Okay." She didn't know what that meant yet. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October. He'd been in the ICU for 11 days after a stroke, and on the last 3 of those days, he wasn't conscious at all. He was on a ventilator. The nurses were kind. They kept the room quiet. My older sister, Diana, showed up on day 9, flew in from Phoenix where she'd been living with her husband, and she cried at his bedside in a way that felt like a performance. I'd been sleeping in the waiting room every night. I hadn't gone home once. I'd been the one talking to the doctors, signing the daily paperwork, calling his friends, managing his phone so it didn't ring off the hook with well-meaning people while he was dying. I was 28. My mother had passed 4 years earlier. After that, it had been just me and my dad in that house, the same house he'd lived in for 31 years, the one with the green shutters on Mercer Lane. When Mom died, Dad got quiet for a long time. But slowly, we found our way back to each other. He taught me to make her chicken and dumplings recipe from memory. We watched old game shows on Friday nights. I took care of the yard because he said his back was going. He wasn't alone, and neither was I. Diana had moved out at 22, married early, and came home for Christmas most years. That was the extent of it. She and Dad weren't estranged, but they weren't close the way we were. There was a distance between them that nobody ever named out loud, but everyone understood. She'd chosen a life far away, and he'd respected that. He'd told me once, quietly, over coffee on a Sunday morning, that he'd updated his will a few years back, that the house would come to me because I was the one who was here, and that he'd made sure Diana received a fair share of his savings account. He said he wanted to be straightforward about it so there were no surprises. I told him not to talk about that stuff. He said I had to be a grown-up about it. I told him he was being morbid. He laughed. That was 6 months before the stroke. I didn't think about that conversation again until 4 days after the funeral, when Diana sat me down at the kitchen table in Dad's house, my house. I believed and slid a document across the table. "Dad updated his will last year," she said. "Everything goes to me. The house, the business, his accounts. You get his personal effects and his car." I looked at the paper. It was a will amendment, a codicil dated 13 months ago. Dad's signature was at the bottom. I picked it up and read it carefully. Then I set it down. "Okay," I said. Diana blinked. She'd clearly been prepared for a fight. "I wanted to tell you myself before the attorney reads it at the formal reading next week. I thought it was only fair." "I appreciate that," I said. "Can I have a copy of this?" She hesitated, then handed me a second printed page. "You have 48 hours to take what's yours and make arrangements," she said. "I'm going to need the house." I looked at my sister across the table. She was wearing lipstick at 9 in the morning in our dead father's kitchen. She'd already moved 2 of her suitcases into his bedroom. "Okay," I said again, and I meant something entirely different than she thought I did. Here is what Diana didn't know about me. I had worked as a paralegal for 3 years before switching to a different career path. I knew what a valid codicil looked like. I knew what it required. 2 witnesses, a notary, specific language. And I knew my father's signature better than I knew my own. I'd been forging it on school permission slips since I was 12 not to deceive, just because he was always at work and I needed to get on the field trip bus, and I knew every loop, every slant, every place where his pen lifted slightly off the page. The signature on that document was wrong. The R in his first name started differently. The tail on the Y in his last name was too long. And the date was 13 months ago, which meant it would have been around the time his vision had been deteriorating badly enough that he'd finally agreed to see the eye doctor. He wouldn't have been reading documents carefully. He would have trusted whoever handed him a pen. I took the copy Diana gave me, went upstairs to my childhood bedroom, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I didn't cry. I was past crying that week. I thought clearly, the way you do when grief has burned everything else away and all that's left is focus. Then I started making a list. The first person I called was my father's attorney, whose name I'd had saved in my phone for 3 years because Dad had made me save it. His name was Mr. Callahan, and he'd handled my parents' wills, their property taxes, their estate planning for over 15 years. I told him my sister had shown me a codicil dated 13 months prior and I needed to understand the timeline. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Rachel, I drafted your father's last will and testament 2 years ago. To my knowledge, there has been no amendment filed through this office." I asked if he had the original will available. He said he did. I asked who the house was left to in that document. He paused. You, he said, and I'd like to know a great deal more about this codicil. I told him I would be at his office at 8 a.m. the following morning. The second call I made was to the notary listed on the codicil document. Every notary has a public registry. I looked up the name of Patricia Holden and found her office. I called and asked if she had a record of notarizing a document for my father at any point in the past 18 months. She checked. She had no record of his name. None. I asked her if her seal had ever been reported missing or misused. There was a pause. She said her notary stamp had been stolen from her car 2 years prior, and she'd reported it to the county at the time. I wrote that down. The third thing I did was pull up my father's medical records, which I still had access to because I had been his designated healthcare proxy for the last 2 years. The codicil was dated on a Wednesday in September, 13 months ago. I searched his calendar, which I'd kept on my phone in sync with his ever since his first minor health scare the year before. On that Wednesday, Dad had been at a conference in Columbus, Ohio, a 2-day trade show for his small kitchen equipment supply business. He'd sent me a photo of himself in front of a display booth. I still had it. Time-stamped, geotagged, Columbus, Ohio, 2:48 p.m. on a Wednesday. He was 400 miles away on the day he supposedly sat down and signed a new will. I slept 4 hours that night. In the morning, I packed a bag and moved in with my friend Courtney, 2 miles away. I didn't fight Diana for the house. I didn't argue. I sent her a text that said, "I've moved my things. I'll reach out next week about the estate reading." She sent back a thumbs up emoji. I imagine she thought she'd won something. She had no idea I was just getting started. Mr. Callahan was thorough, and he was angry in the quiet way that experienced attorneys get angry, not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. He looked at the codicil for about 90 seconds, then set it on his desk and folded his hands. "This wasn't executed through this office," he said. "And the notary seal, I can check this against the county registry. If this stamp was stolen and reported, that's documented evidence of forgery." I laid out everything I had: the medical records, the conference photo, the notary's statement, his own records showing no amendment had been filed. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Your father's original will stands," he said, "and whoever prepared this document committed a serious crime." He paused. "You said your sister presented this to you?" I said yes. He asked me if I had the copy she'd given me. I slid it across the desk. He looked at it again. "I'm going to reach out to a forensic document examiner I've worked with before, and I think we should involve law enforcement before the formal estate reading." I asked him when the formal reading was scheduled. "I've scheduled it for next Friday," he said. 11 o'clock. Your sister confirmed she'd be attending. I nodded slowly. "Don't change anything," I said. "Let her come." He looked at me for a moment with the specific expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of who they're talking to. "All right," he said. "I want to explain something about why I didn't confront Diana immediately. It wasn't because I was afraid of her. It wasn't because I wasn't furious. I was furious in a way I don't have good words for, the kind of rage that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't dissolve, doesn't spike, just remains, steady and cold and clarifying. My father had been in the ground for less than 2 weeks. The ink on the funeral program was barely dry, and my sister had used the fact that I was sleeping in a hospital waiting room while he died to manufacture a document that would take everything he'd worked his entire life for and hand it to her. But here's what I knew from those 3 years working in a law office. The more rope you give someone, the more thoroughly they hang themselves. If I had screamed at Diana across the kitchen table that morning, she would have gotten a lawyer, gotten cautious, maybe destroyed evidence. Instead, she thought I had given up, and while she thought that, she kept moving. She called the utilities and tried to transfer the accounts into her name. She contacted Dad's business partner to announce she was taking over management. She showed up at the bank with the codicil and attempted to have herself added to his accounts. Every single one of those actions was documented. Every phone call, every form she filed, every conversation she had where she represented herself as the legal heir based on that document. She was building her own case against herself, one step at a time, and she didn't even know it. The forensic document examiner came back with results in 5 days. The signature on the codicil was inconsistent with my father's genuine signature across 17 documented points. The paper used for the document had a manufacturing date that put it in production only 8 months ago, which meant it could not have been used to print a document from 13 months prior. The notary stamp matched the serial number of the one reported stolen 2 years earlier. Mr. Callahan called me on Thursday evening, the night before the estate reading. He told me what the examiner had found. He told me the county sheriff's office had been briefed and that a detective would be present at his office the following morning. He told me to be there at 10:45, 15 minutes before Diana arrived. "Are you sure you want to be in the room?" he asked. "You don't have to be. I'll be there," I said. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't from anxiety. It was something more like the feeling before a very long, very important exam, the night where your mind won't quiet down because some part of it is still reviewing everything, checking and rechecking, making sure nothing was missed. I thought about my dad. I thought about that Sunday morning conversation over coffee, him telling me not to worry, telling me he'd taken care of things. I thought about how he'd been right, in the end, in a way he couldn't have anticipated. He'd taken care of things a long time ago, and all I'd had to do was make sure nobody undid them. I arrived at Mr. Callahan's office at 10:40. The detective, a woman named Detective Okafor, in plain clothes, quiet and composed, was already there, seated near the back of the conference room. Mr. Callahan nodded at me when I walked in. I sat down at the far end of the conference table and I folded my hands and I waited. Diana arrived at 11:03. She was wearing a blazer. She had her husband on the phone when she walked in, and she was telling him it wouldn't take long. She stepped into the conference room and saw me and stopped walking. "What is she doing here?" she said. "She's a beneficiary of the estate," Mr. Callahan said. "Please sit down, Diana." Diana looked at me. I looked at her. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She sat. Mr. Callahan began with the original will. He read it clearly, and without editorializing the house to me, the savings to be divided, the business to be managed according to the succession plan Dad had established with his partner. Diana's expression was controlled for about 30 seconds. Then she reached into her bag and placed the codicil on the table. "That will was superseded," she said. "I have the amendment here." "Yes," Mr. Callahan said. He picked it up. "This document was submitted to me for review earlier this week." He set it back down. "Diana, I need to inform you that this codicil has been examined by a certified forensic document analyst and has been determined to be fraudulent." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a very high place. Diana's face didn't move for a moment. Then she said, "That's not possible. The signature is inconsistent with your father's known handwriting across multiple documented points," Mr. Callahan said. "The paper stock was manufactured after the date on the document, and the notary stamp used was reported stolen 2 years ago by the notary, whose name appears on this document, who has no record of ever meeting your father." Diana's face was doing something complicated. I found that document in his files. I didn't know anything about. "There is also the matter," Mr. Callahan continued, in the same even tone, "of the date on the document. Your father was in Columbus, Ohio on that date, attending a trade show. We have time-stamped, geotagged photographic evidence and hotel records confirming his presence there." The room was very quiet. Diana looked at me for the first time since she'd walked in. I think she was looking for something for shock, or anger, or triumph, or any emotion she could use to orient herself. She didn't find anything useful, because I had rehearsed this moment in my mind enough times that I knew exactly what my face was doing, which was nothing. "Additionally, Mr. Callahan said, and he gestured toward Detective Okafor at the back of the room, "I've been in contact with the county sheriff's office, who have an interest in speaking with you regarding the fraudulent document, your attempt to access the deceased's bank accounts using it, and your communication with his business partner, in which you misrepresented your legal standing in the estate." Diana stood up so fast her chair scraped back against the floor. "I want a lawyer," she said. "That's absolutely your right," Mr. Callahan said. Detective Okafor stood. She wasn't rushing. She didn't need to. "Miss Diana," she said calmly, "I'd like to speak with you. You're not under arrest at this moment, but I do have some questions." I stayed seated. I had no reason to stand. There was nothing left for me to do in that room except be present, which I was. Diana left with the detective. I don't know exactly what was said in the hallway. I know that the investigation that followed took about 11 weeks. I know that my sister retained a defense attorney within the hour. I know that the charges that were eventually filed included forgery of a legal document, fraud, attempted theft by deception, and unauthorized use of a stolen notary seal. I know that her husband, who had, I later learned, helped her find someone to produce the document, was named as a co-conspirator. I know that she called me once, from a number I didn't recognize, about 3 weeks after that morning in the conference room. I answered because I didn't know who it was. She started to speak and I listened for about 4 seconds, and then I said, very quietly, "Diana, you need to talk to your attorney, not to me." and I ended the call. Mr. Callahan filed the probate paperwork using the original will the same week. The house transferred to my name 6 weeks later. I stood in the empty living room on the day I got the keys, and I didn't know what I felt. The grief was still there. It will probably always be there, or at least it will be there for a long time, changing shape as it goes. But there was something else too, something quieter. The knowledge that the thing Dad had intended had held, that what he'd built hadn't been taken away, that the people who love you can protect you in ways that outlast them if they plan carefully enough and trust the right people. I thought about what he'd said over coffee that Sunday morning, the way he'd made me write Mr. Callahan's number in my phone, the way he'd said, "I want to be straightforward about it so there are no surprises." I don't know if he suspected something might happen. I don't know if he had some feeling about Diana that he never fully voiced to me. Maybe he was just being practical. Maybe he was just a man who'd already lost a wife and wanted to make sure the person he was leaving behind was taken care of. Either way, it worked. The house needed a lot of small repairs that had built up over the years. There was a place on the second-floor hallway where the baseboard had come loose, and I'd been meaning to fix it for 2 years. I spent 3 weekends going through those things, one at a time. I found his chicken and dumplings recipe written on an index card in the kitchen drawer. In his handwriting, the real handwriting, the one I knew, with its particular loops and the way the letters leaned slightly right, I put it on the refrigerator. His business partner, a man named Gerald, who had worked alongside my dad for 16 years, called me a month after everything settled. He'd been shaken by Diana's approach to him, by the calls she'd made trying to assert control before the estate was even resolved. He told me he'd been worried. He told me he was glad it had worked out the way it had. He asked me what I wanted to do with Dad's share of the business. I said I wanted to keep it exactly the way it was. I said Dad had trusted Gerald for 16 years, and I didn't see any reason to change what was already working. Gerald got quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He was proud of you. He talked about you all the time." I thanked him, and I got off the phone quickly because I didn't want to cry while I was talking to a relative stranger, and I needed a moment to myself. I stood in the kitchen, in the house on Mercer Lane, in the same spot where my mother used to make Sunday breakfast when I was a child, and I let myself feel it, the loss, and the love, and the fact that some things hold even when other people try to break them. Diana's case was still pending when I recorded this. I'll update you when there's a final resolution. What I can tell you is that the last I heard, the prosecution was recommending significant charges and her attorney had been making noises about a plea arrangement. I genuinely don't know what I want from that process anymore. I wanted the truth to be documented. It is. I wanted the house to stay in the family. It has. I wanted my father's wishes to mean something after he was gone. They do. I don't want to see my sister go to prison. She's still my sister. But I also know that what she did wasn't impulsive or careless or born from grief. She brought a document to a dead man's estate reading that she knew was false. She planned this. She looked at our father dying in a hospital bed and she thought about what she could take. That's not something I can excuse or reframe or find a gentle way to understand. I've tried. I've sat with it long enough to know that some things just are what they are. What I know is this: keep records of everything. If someone you love is making plans for what happens after they're gone, know who their attorney is. Keep their important documents somewhere you can find them. Be the person who shows up, because the person who shows up is the one who understands what's actually true when the moment comes that truth matters. My dad put Mr. Callahan's number in my phone 3 years ago and told me to save it. That single, simple act is half the reason I'm sitting in his house right now instead of standing outside it. The faucet is fixed. The screen door closes right. The baseboard in the hallway is solid now. And the recipe is still on the refrigerator.